a talk about a very important topic, something which is probably harder than many of us think. It is combining privacy and AI. If it would be easy, probably more people would be doing it. Our speaker is Thomas Strottner. He is Business Development Manager at Brighter AI, which just recently won the Berlin Deep Tech Award, and he is filling in for Marian Glaser at the last minute. So thank you very much. Thank you for filling in. We're glad to have you. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much. And as you mentioned, privacy indeed is of course a very, very important topic nowadays. And in the previous talk that I loved, it was a great talk. We also heard a lot about the darkness. So now this is not only the talk of Brighter AI, which brings hopefully some brightness, but I will also tackle one of the biggest aspects or issues that we have today, which is data privacy, and also how we can approach it with an AI-based approach to solve this issue and to bring more brightness also to this world. This is something I think we've all heard the quote, we've all seen this kind of image. What is very important for us to consider also as AI researchers is that for developing these kinds of systems, you need data quantity, a lot of data like these companies have, but you also need good data quality. And this is something that we will also get to a conclusion, because privacy might seem to sometimes stand in the way here. So what we at Brighter AI focus on a lot, and which is also very important for AI-based innovation, is camera data. So we see cameras as the richest sensor for innovative AI-based use cases. So great examples for that is, for example, the Amazon Go shops where you have like automated checkouts, all based on cameras. There are a lot of use cases in smart cities also that start from people counting to a lot of other use cases. And then, of course, there are self-driving cars where cameras, also as Tesla frequently is emphasizing, that cameras are actually the most important sensor here, and that a lot of data needs to be collected, needs to be processed in order to develop smart vehicles. Then when we talk about the amazing achievements of AI, I think facial recognition can be one of them. And of course, most of us, we really appreciate innovation that it brings, like, for example, opening your iPhone just with your face. And that's really amazing. And we can see that in the last years with more like stronger modern neural networks, today these systems can detect up to 20,000 key points in your face in order to track an individual. And this is something that can be extremely useful. And we should not focus only on the dark side of these things, but of course also on the positive. However, if we look at recent news, there's also, of course, a big risk of abuse. And I mean, we are also an AI company, and I'm also someone who believes in the power of AI. But I think the danger of having widespread surveillance and being monitored constantly as an individual, their facial recognition is, of course, a big threat. And we've seen this in the past. So one of the big news was recently with the Black Lives Matter protest, that in fact, facial recognition was already being used to track individuals. We see that from also authoritarian regimes, where facial recognition is used to do things like social scoring. And there's already a movement also by individuals that try to protect their privacy more strongly, for example, on social media, as I'm showing here. And there are more and more people that feel that their privacy is invaded. And this is not only by individuals and by society, but we can also see that a lot of countries are actually acting on that. This map is showing how data protection regulations are already in place and how strong they are. And if we look at countries like the US and Canada and European countries with the GDPR, then data privacy regulation is already quite heavy. And even in countries where sometimes you wouldn't expect it, like for example here, you see China also being marked as heavy. This is also an area where, for example, if a company in automotive wants to collect camera data in public, there are a lot of restrictions actually, and it's not easy to collect and to process data that contains personal information. It's also quite interesting when looking at the US. Not many people have realized that in California this year, there has been the introduction of the California Consumer Privacy Act, which is heavily close to GDPR. So a lot of people complain about our regulation, but we actually think this is also a chance for us to export privacy-centric solutions, because California, I mean, it's not only the 5th largest economy if it would be a country, but it's also the home to the tech giants. So this is quite an interesting movement. Also in San Francisco, for example, facial recognition technology has been banned. So this is quite interesting to look also to what's going on outside of Europe. Now, what we recently did was a study on the use of video data in particular in different countries. We did this study together with the German AI Association, the KI Bundesverband, and it was also emphasizing that there's more and more regulation in different countries, but you know, you see these large international companies like automotive companies that operate very internationally, but then you have regulation that can still be different in different countries. So it's important to like pay close attention to all these laws and also to prepare for that. And now what often happens is that there is a perceived AI privacy dilemma, which we show here with like 2 different pills. So sometimes you have on the left side here, the powerful, accurate AI models, but where there is a potential of breaking privacy. So because you want to have very good structured data, or you want to have very clean image and video data, this might lead to accurate AI models. On the other hand, if you need to anonymize data, if you would, for example, blur faces and image data, then you have worse quality. And this is also something that we don't want. So this is like often the perceived dilemma and the question, which pill do you have to swallow? But there are actually lots of already potential solutions when looking at what can you do to emphasize privacy with different concepts. So there's, for example, a different processing approach. I will jump into this in a second. So there's processing that can be centralized, but with more privacy, it can also be decentralized, even for AI systems. Then when we look at data protection concepts, there's, for example, privacy by default, and there's privacy by design. And then there's a last one that I would like to talk about, which is there's the option to alter the data itself. And this can be through data augmentation or using synthetic data. And as Bright AI, we are somewhere here in between. So talking about synthetic data, I think this was also in the talk before. There are very interesting new technologies like generative adversarial networks. And then there are also new concepts like privacy by design. And this is exactly the area where we are as a company. So jumping first into the decentralized approach for more privacy. This might be something that some of you have heard already in the past. There's a concept called federated learning. I think this is also emphasized a lot by companies like Apple, which mainly means that the algorithm is trained over multiple distributed devices or servers that contain local data samples, but do not exchange them. So this means, for example, in the example of Apple, that user data could stay on the end device and doesn't need to leave the end device. But then a local AI model can also be trained directly on that device, directly on the edge. What happens then is that these models would be encrypted and merged. And this has also advantages when it comes to the use of resources and the resilience of the systems. However, this is still in contrast to the more centralized approaches that are mainly used. So most companies, I was giving the example of automotive earlier, they want to collect data and then work with this data in a central place. So usually is the research center of the company. Then when we look at privacy by default, this means that you would emphasize data protection with friendly default settings. So you would ensure that personal data is processed with the highest privacy protection so that by default, personal data is made accessible to an indefinite number of entities. So this is like one of the things that also GDPR in Europe is emphasizing, and it means that by default, you would have the most strict settings. In the real life, this is something that we see a lot with cookie notices, for example. So by default, these things should say, you're not collecting cookies. And then as soon as you accept something, you can also jump into a less privacy-friendly setting. Then what you can also see is that you can use technology to create something that is called privacy by design. So data protection can be most easily complied with if it's already fully technically integrated, so that no subsequent measures are necessary. One of the ways that we know a lot is encryption, using encrypted data in the first place. And this is also something that's very important. Also, these different measures are not either or, but they can also be combined. Then something that we can do is pseudonymize attributes. So this would mean, for example, that you would always use the same avatar for a person if you have image data of that person, or you would always use a different name for a person's data set if it's medical data, for example. And then there's also anonymization, where you would completely remove the data from the actually identifiable person, so that it's no longer identifiable. And as mentioned, like with adding privacy by design layers to your technologies, you can also better fulfill requirements like GDPR, and it's also possible to combine these. And then something that's very interesting, also if we look at the area of self-driving cars, is synthetic data. Here a fully synthetic image would be generated from scratch. And this can solve some of the problems, but this can certainly not solve all problems. I think when you look at corner or edge cases for autonomous vehicles, this is inherent that there's a problem, because our own creativity would probably never be enough to put all those scenarios in a synthetic data-like scenario. But what you can do is you can also do like digital twins or create a virtual reality synthetic data, where you don't have also privacy issues, because you wouldn't have actual people, you wouldn't have the actual car and the license plates, but you have a synthetic world basically that you can use to train algorithms. And then something that can also be used is data augmentation. So with data augmentation, you can use an existing data set. And because at the beginning I said more data quantity, but also quality is relevant. So you can take data that you already have. And with that data, like for example, here, a clean image, you could add certain artifacts to it. So here, for example, you could add fog to the image, and then you can create some of those corner cases by augmenting the data. So you can have maybe a subset of privacy compliant data and then augment it to actually increase the quantity of that data, and also to have more corner cases. Of course, here again, a simulation can never fully reflect the reality. So there can be a bias in that data, especially if you have the same scenes with different augmentation levels. So the privacy dilemma that is often perceived for AI when it comes to image and video data is something that we know mainly because of this kind of pixelation. So if you look at a lot of studies or at the data that automotive companies are collecting for self-driving, you wouldn't find a lot of pixelated data. As a research scientist or as a data engineer, you don't want to work with this kind of pixelated images, because what it does is it creates artifacts for your AI systems. Here on the right side, this is a segmentation map by Google DeepMinds, which segments all the objects. And what you see here is that on the left side, a phantom person appears. And also here in the head of that person, there's a bird apparently. And this is artifacts that are solely introduced to this image because of the pixelation. And at the same time, you also don't want to train images or AI systems based on this kind of pixelated data, because it might increase a bias. Think about self-driving cars. If you would pixelate all the license plates of the cars, then maybe subconsciously you would train a neural network to actually recognize the pixelated license plate. And if you would then use this kind of algorithm in real life, it might happen that it's not detecting a car, because in real life, cars don't have pixelated license plates. So what we at Bright AI developed is we want to enable companies to collect the actual real data but with privacy compliance. So what we do is we generate synthetic objects for faces and for license plates. So here on the left side, you see a synthetic face here, and this is the actual real face. And thereby, this is a fully natural picture that you can use for your AI models. What is very important about that, I was earlier showing how facial recognition models are really the biggest threat when it comes to identifying individuals in large data sets. And what this can really exclude is the chance of re-identifying an individual in a large data set. So here we test this with different facial recognition algorithms. Here, for example, from Microsoft Azure. And what this shows is that there's only a 16% match, which effectively means this face belongs to a different person. And this is even considering that this image is the exact same scenery with the exact clothing and everything. So this is something that is very fundamental, where we as Bright AI work with a lot of companies in automotive, in data labeling, in retail and smart cities, to take the pain away from data privacy that sometimes AI researchers feel. At the same time, to have more data privacy, to remove this threat of re-identification, and create high quality data that can be used for AI systems. So that was an introduction of our company. As we had in the introduction, this talk was supposed to be given by Marian, our CEO and co-founder, who couldn't be here on short notice. My email address is thomas@bright.ai. My name is Thomas Strottner, and thank you very much for listening to this talk.
Yes, Thomas, thank you very much for the talk. Thanks again for filling in. I have a couple of questions for you. I encourage our audience to also ask further questions. The first one would be, you were talking about the California data privacy law, which is very similar and orients, I think, itself at the GDPR. And you said this might be very good for you and maybe other European companies. I was thinking, if this law exists in California, why don't companies in the Silicon Valley do it themselves? Or maybe the big players have already done it, because of course Google and Apple, they have to be active in companies in countries where they already have to be GDPR compliant.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we definitely see it that these companies also engage in privacy topics. So, for example, one of the big Silicon Valley companies opened an office in Germany that is specialized in data privacy. And I think this move also emphasizes one of the reasons why we are in a good position in Europe to develop these kinds of solutions, not only because we have a reputation, but also because we have a lot of expertise in these areas. We find this as a company that there's also a lot of trust, because like with the introduction of GDPR, the European Union was the first one with very strict privacy laws. And I think this first mover advantage we also have to take for new solutions. So I think we are in an extremely good position to be known for data privacy and to have a good reputation on that.
Thank you. And there's one more question regarding the synthetic faces. Are these pictures that you generate or that you modify good for all kinds of research and AI training, or are they maybe incompatible when you try to train for emotions, because obviously it's not the same face anymore?
Yeah, excellent question. This is in fact different from use case to use case. There might be differences if you just simply want to do an instant segmentation. You want to differentiate between objects like cars and people in general, or you want to detect the emotions. However, in general, we don't introduce any artifacts. So the artificial faces that we generate have the same kinds of emotions, the same attributes like age and gender, that the original image has. So in general, this can not only be used to augment your data sets, but also the attributes should stay the same. However, if this should be tested, so if there's anyone who's very interested, this needs to be tested on the individual data set. And then we can also make comparison from how a system trained on the original data behaves and a system based on anonymized faces.
Right. So you're obviously developing edge technology. I'm interested in what are the next big steps for you? What are maybe big problems that you know you will have to tackle but are not so sure how to do it at the moment? Like, where is the edge that you perceive?
I'm not sure if I understand your question correctly, but for us, so the problem of privacy and having good data for AI is actually not a small problem. So I was mentioning some of the use cases, and if you look at, for example, the amount of data that is being collected already for self-driving car development in the retail space, this is quite a significant problem. So this is really something where we see an excellent fit and not only a big market, but also something where we can really support companies in the future.
Right. Thank you very much again, Thomas. We don't have any more questions for you. So again, thank you. We wish you a lot of success in your endeavors, and we're very curious what Brighter AI will do in the future. Thank you.